Okay, guys, feeling a bit under the weather today. It's been a very, very, very long week. You know, staying up late for the boxing also. So haven't got too much sleep this past week. But we're gonna crack on, talk about Gennady Golovkin versus Saul Canelo Alvarez, and what the logical steps are for the fighters after the fight, and discuss a bit about the fight, the scorecards, and see what everyone else's thoughts in the comment section is as well. So obviously, as we all know, it's come out that the fight was scored a draw, one card, 118, 110 for Canelo. The other, I think it was 1 or 2 points for Golovkin, and the 114, 114 draw. So obviously, it's ended as a draw. Golovkin keeps his belts, and Canelo still remains the lineal middleweight champion. But this leaves a lot more questions than answers, especially one of the scorecards, and how the fight panned out. My scorecard was I've watched it a few times, and I actually changed my opinion a few times. The first time I scored it for Golovkin. The second time, I had it maybe a draw, possibly Canelo by a round or two. I can understand why people might be scoring it to Canelo. People may score it a draw, and people who score it to GGG. It's totally understandable. It was not a robbery for me. It was a close fight. It could have gone either way, and the 118, 110 card, I think, really flatters to deceive Canelo. He really got a lot more credit on that card than deserved, and again, it's happened, another dubious scorecard for Canelo Alvarez, which is a shame, because he really, really did fight out of his skin. I think in this fight, at times in this fight, he looked the superior fighter to Gennady Golovkin. But there were other times, I think, in the middle of the fight he kind of let him into the fight. For me, there was a kind of I'd say couple of momentum swings in the fight. The first sort of couple of rounds, I had it with Canelo a few rounds up. Felt Canelo done the better work. He got his he looked crisp, he looked sharp, he looked very light on his feet. His footwork seemed to have dramatically improved from previous fights, and I thought he was on the way to a I wouldn't say convincing sort of points victory, but I thought, what, this is looking easy work for a bit for Canelo, or it's looking he's making it look a lot easier than it needs to be. I think he expended a lot of energy in that in those first 3 rounds. I'd say I gave him the first three. Maybe the third round was a bit tighter, but I did edge Canelo. That was a swing round for me, and there were various swing rounds in this fight, to be fair. So I can understand why people do score it to Canelo or draw or Golovkin. All results are plausible in this sort of circumstance, and this fight. Then obviously, kind of through the middle portion of the fight, I thought Gennady Golovkin got his work off much better. There were still times where I felt like he was cutting the ring off on Canelo, but he wasn't really, he wasn't really making Canelo do anything more than, just sit against the ropes and whatnot. I thought, he allowed Canelo to get his work off, and whether or not Canelo's a faster fighter, he's a younger fighter, that all is true. But I thought Golovkin allowed Canelo to get a lot of his, a lot of offense off, especially on the back foot. He hit him with that jab, especially with the left hook to the body. I thought Golovkin was susceptible to that a lot more than once in the fight, especially in the middle rounds as well. And I thought Canelo still done well in the middle rounds, but I thought he definitely faded a little bit in the middle rounds. He was breathing a little bit heavier in the middle rounds with his mouth open, so maybe that's a sign that he was feeling the pace a bit, and he was feeling the pressure a bit. But Golovkin got off his work, and even though he was doing well, I still thought Canelo was in the fight, and it was still pretty close. Come sort of the 10th, I'd say. The last few rounds, Canelo probably nicks it for me. And that was the first time I watched it, so that I had it 7-5 to GGG on my first card. The second time I watched it, I had it a draw, and I think I scored one of the swing rounds to Canelo. So I could understand why it's a draw. It's not the worst result in terms of how the fight played out, but it's an inconclusive result. Let's put it that way. People who scored it, I'm seeing some comments online. Canelo 116, 112, and I'm thinking Canelo, winning 8 of the 12 rounds to GGG's 4. It does seem a bit far fetched, more than 7 rounds for Canelo is pushing it a little bit for me. And I'd say maybe the same for Golovkin. I know some people are scoring it 116, 112. I saw Harold Lederman on HBO actually score it 116, 112 for GGG. I can't see 116, 112. I think it's a 7-fight fight either way. So and a draw is possible also. I know some people are saying the Jacobs fight was closer. And that's obviously opinion. I guess the opinion that everyone has is Jacobs got robbed in that fight or Golovkin won that fight. There is going to be differing opinions. People aren't going to have the same opinion, and I guess that's what makes boxing so interesting and so so exciting to watch in terms of these big fights also. But I just thought the travesty that was the 118, 110 card really done Canelo it done Canelo disservice. It also done GGG a disservice and the fans. Adelaide Bird, she really messed up, like really, really, really bad in this fight. There's no way that Gennady Golovkin won only 2 rounds in this fight. That is absolutely impossible. There's no way that Golovkin only won 2 rounds in this fight. And Canelo won 10. But, we've got to look at it and say they've obviously, subsequent information has come out and they're not going to be putting her in a fight. The Nevada State Athletic Commission, they won't be putting her in a fight of magnitude, in recent coming months. So that's obviously good news. They've taken it seriously. But this has happened time and time again for Canelo. And I understand why they give him these scorecards, because he's a flashy fighter, and maybe the judges are in Oscar's back pocket. But regardless, I do understand maybe why they give Canelo some of these cards. Maybe in the Lara fight, the Trout fight, this fight against GGG. I do understand, but that doesn't make it right. The Floyd fight was a complete anomaly also. 114, 114. He barely landed a glove on Floyd, and he got 114, 114. And it's a shame because the fight was a pretty decent fight for what it turned out to be. They both gave it as much as they could, and now we're talking about a dodgy scorecard at the end of it all, and whether or not there'll be a rematch or not. I'm hoping there is a rematch because I'd like to see the fight again, but the scorecard does ruin it. Thought Golovkin showed, signs of age. Signs of wear on his body. I thought he was very slow. I'll be honest. I thought he was very slow. The Golovkin that I've seen in the past against, albeit not the contenders that Canelo is, but he against some semi-credible names. Matthew Macklin is there. Daniel Gill was there. He looked like not fast, but he looked a lot more aware. He looked a lot crisper. His work seemed to have a lot more snap. I thought, there's a potential argument that GGG looked a bit shot in this fight, because there was plenty of times where he had Canelo backed up against the ropes, or he cut the ring down on Canelo, and Canelo was, going towards the ropes, and GGG kind of through the straight right or right uppercut, but it was just a pity patty shot. It wasn't really, there was no real meat behind it, or there was no sort of conviction to go in for the kill there, and that's not the Golovkin that we're used to seeing. So there is an argument. I'm not saying he is shot or not. I'm not making that argument, but there may be a suggestion. It didn't look the same Golovkin. Maybe he's just lost a step, and that's probably true. So maybe that's more a he's just gotten a bit older, but and he's not shot, but he's just got a bit older. So maybe that is that, but he definitely didn't look the same Golovkin that I've seen in there in the past. The previous Golovkin, he looked a real threat, and and I guess that's still testament to this fight. Golovkin probably is not the same Golovkin that he was 2 years ago, or 18 months ago, and he was there, he was battling, he was competing with Canelo in every single round, or the majority of rounds, and many people actually think he's won this fight. I picked him. I picked him in the first time I watched this fight. I thought Golovkin won 7-5 the first time I watched it. Second time I had it about a draw, but I can understand Canelo winning an extra round. So Golovkin maybe lost a step. Canelo seemed to he seemed to have some good stuff going for him. The weight transition seemed good. He seemed fresh in the first early rounds, but then again he did gas in the the middle rounds, and he got a second win towards the end. So the fight panned out. Maybe similar at times, maybe not to what I thought, but I did think the dodgy scorecard might play a factor, or the dodgy judges, and obviously it's come out. It has 118-110, and yeah, maybe just does a disservice to both guys. I think both guys will probably feel a little aggrieved at the scorecard. Obviously Oscar's even come out and said 118-110 is disgusting and ludicrous. Tom Loffer, I'm sure he retweeted a picture on Twitter that showed Harold Edmonds' card for Golovkin. So obviously he's thinking Golovkin won. Obviously promoters will be promoters and say their fighter won, but the real, I wouldn't say the real winners are boxing fans, because a draw doesn't is it's not on the money for us, I guess. The only good thing that comes out of it is we get a rematch, and that is the win for the boxing fans. The L is that a draw and a poor scorecard, a very poor scorecard comes out. But at least on the flip side, we get to see a rematch, and for what it'll be a good fight. But I do think if a rematch was to occur, I would pick Canelo Alvarez. I'll be honest. I think GGG looked a bit plodding in there. I thought he looked a bit, I thought he looked a bit gun shy in there, and I thought, if a rematch does happen, I'd probably edge Canelo Alvarez. GGG, he done superbly. Obviously his age, I think he's nearing 35, or 34 or something. But he's coming towards the twilight of his career, and I'm glad he made a great payday off this fight. And for me, I picked him the first time. I'd probably go with my gut instinct and say Golovkin won just about. But I did rewatch it and had it a draw. So I'm not opposed to any sort of result, either way. But for me, it's not more than a 7-5 fight either way, or a draw. There's no chance of there being a 118-110 on my scorecard, or even a 116-112 for either guy. The punch stats obviously favoured Golovkin, so I take that into consideration, especially in the first time I scored it as well. And obviously the fight has happened. Hopefully we get to see a rematch. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the aftermath of anything else that comes out. That the most logical step is a rematch. I wouldn't like to see Billy Joe in there. We saw Billy Joe against Willie Monroe. Obviously I'll kind of discuss all the action and then round it up in one video in this video, instead of kind of doing 3, 4, 5 separate videos. And Willie Monroe didn't look, he was very negative in the fight. Billy Joe looked decent in spots, but Billy Joe, he's coming off a long layoff and a large cut in weight, so fairly decent performance against a somewhat slick fighter. For Billy Joe, I wouldn't like to see the Golovkin or Canelo fight for him next. I'd like to see him face maybe a David Lemieux, or a kind of top contender at the 160 weight class. maybe I know Murata and Dam are fighting for the WBA regular or something like that. One of those opponents would have been good. You know, those sort of opponents who are, you know, top 10 at the very least in the middleweight division would be a good test for Billy Joe, and it would get him, you know, right into the sort of Golovkin and Canelo mix. I think if he has another strong showing in his next fight, which could possibly be December. So fingers crossed on that, and let's hope he's actually back in the gym and, you know, stays in shape as well. Uh, Obviously, that's kind of the middleweight mix. I'll talk about Billy Joe maybe a little bit again in the Anthony Yard video. I'll cover the Box Nation. I did say I was going to cover it, but I realised there's a lot more boxing on, so I'm actually going to cut it short there. Discuss the Box Nation bill on a separate bill, and yeah, kind of go through there because I quite enjoyed that bill when I watched it with. Or I was messaging one of my friends while I was watching it, and he seemed to enjoy it too. So, gonna cover that in a separate video. Uh, Let me know your thoughts on Canelo. Also, Diego De La Hoya beat Randy Caballero. Quite a wide decision. So, not the best fight to watch, but De La Hoya marches on in the super bantamweight division, and Randy Caballero needs to regroup again. He didn't look great in this fight. Let's put it that way. Not much more to add on that. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on, you know, the two main fights of the weekend. Saul Canelo Alvarez, obviously, against Golovkin, the dodgy scorecard. Let me know your thoughts on all of that. I'd like to, you know, hear what people think and who they picked, why they picked them, and yeah, let's get a lot of diverse opinions because we're obviously gonna have people in the comments that are picking Golovkin, picking Canelo. Some may pick it. Some may have, you know, scored it a draw also. So yeah, interesting stuff. Also, Willie Monroe versus Billy Joe. That wasn't the most entertaining of fights, so I'm not gonna ramble on too much about that. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on that. And yeah, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And catch up in the next video. Peace.